Thank you so much for everybody who's joining us for this next webinar session that we're hosting today with Dr. Kleinschmidt. Dr. Monk, go ahead and take it away.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Stormy Monks, and on behalf of the Southwest Center for Pediatric Environmental Health, I want to thank each one of you for joining us today. The Southwest Center for Pediatric Environmental Health is one of the 10 Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Units, known as PACUs, in the U.S. The purpose of the PACU program is to serve as a leading national source of medical information and consultative advice on environmental conditions, with an emphasis on exposure to hazardous substances in the environment that influence human health throughout the vulnerable stages of reproduction and pediatric development. The PACU serves health professionals, community organizations, government officials, federal staff, child care providers, parents, and others who have an interest in environmental conditions that influence reproductive and pediatric health. To serve part of our mission, we will be offering this Pediatric Environmental Health Grand Round series twice a month, with one being held on the first Wednesday of the month and one on the third Thursday of the month. Again, we are so excited to have each one of you here, both medical and non-medical professionals with us for our Grand Rounds with Dr. Kleinschmidt. He will be discussing Mercury, It Happens. Before moving forward, I just want to make sure that you're aware of some housekeeping items. During the presentation, sharing your video is not an option. You will be muted by default, and you cannot unmute yourself. To ask a question, we ask that you type it into the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. We'd like to thank all of our partners at the U.S. EPA, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. Without these organizations, the work of the PACU would not exist. We would also like to thank both the Texas Tech Health Sciences Center El Paso CME Department, specifically Erica Silvas and Jessia Boykin, and the UMC CNE Department, specifically Ms. Celia Gonzalez Mahara, for making continuing education credits available for the series. Each registrant must log in with their registration ID, as this will be used to track their logging in and logging out. We ask that if you are going to be asking for continuing education credits, that you stay for the entire presentation. Our next Grand Rounds will be held on Thursday, July 16th at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, and Ms. Erica Guerrero will be discussing hurricane preparedness. If you're looking for more information on pediatric environmental health and the PACU program, we urge you to go to the PACU National Classroom. And without further ado, the Southwest Center for Pediatric Environmental Health, the UPA Region 6 PACU, is pleased to be joined by Dr. Kurt Kleinschmidt. Dr. Kleinschmidt is a professor of emergency medicine at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. He is the chief of the Division of Medical Toxicology and is the medical director for the Parkland Perinatal Intervention Program. Dr. Kleinschmidt is board certified in emergency medicine, medical toxicology, and addiction medicine. I have heard I've had the joy of hearing Dr. Kleinschmidt speak several times in the past, and I want to let you know that you are in for a treat. Again, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Kleinschmidt with us today, and on behalf of the Southwest Center for Pediatric Environmental Health, we want to offer him a warm welcome. Thank you, Dr. Kleinschmidt.
Well, thank you. All righty. Very kind. Very kind. All right. So let's see. That baton's come back to me. Let me share content. All righty. Everybody see my screen okay?
We can see it.
All right, well, away we go. That was a very, very kind introduction, and the pressure's on for me to perform in a semi-reasonable fashion. By the way, it's always fun stuff that's happening out here. Like, see this? This is my graduating fellows gave me this card that was very kind to them. It looked completely toxic and cool. So anyways, if you're lucky, you too can get a card like this someday. All right, so let's move on to mercury. It happens, and it's interesting. There's so many different heavy metals to be interested in if you're a toxicology nerd or even a non-tox nerd. There's a lot of metals out there that have impacts on what's going on. But some of them, many of them, I certainly have never encountered with a patient or a situation. They may have come by me and I missed it, and so I missed the diagnosis and I failed, but I'm going to ignore those moments. But mercury is one that absolutely I have been involved now with more than once. I probably have had 4 or 5 different mercury-related events that have occurred in the course of my career. And so the odds are, especially depending upon the age of you as you hear this presentation, you too may well have a chance to run into some mercury situations. So great opportunity to present here. And what we're going to go over today is this. We're going to describe the typical presentation of mercury toxicity. That's a good classic clinical thing. But there's aspects here that are really important in terms of talking about when you have a mercury situation, who else is going to be involved? What other potential participants should be involved in the situation? And what can help an event go well or not go well? We're going to get into that. And let's talk about not just the clinical impact, but are there financial impact? And of course, obviously, that's a lead into the answer, yes. I do note that while much of this presentation I put together, Johnny Ordonez, who's one of our previous toxicology fellows, who's back home in Ecuador right now for the last few years, he certainly did some nice work because he was very involved in this project. And that's reflected right here because this publication in Journal of Medical Toxicology just came out this last week. And so this reviews the cases that's going to be the nidus for our discussion here today. And so if you have an interest and want to see more details on what we can get into, Journal of Medical Toxicology literally this last week. Congratulations to Amy Young, our lead on this, because this really was a master of perseverance in order to get this out. So great job to Amy and others who were involved in getting this out. All right, let's just kind of review. Now understand is that mercury comes in many flavors, really 3. But the classic one most of us grew up with was the elemental mercury, quicksilver. And that's the stuff, come on. I could sit here and say, raise your hand if you played with mercury in the past. I can't see it, so you just do it on your own. But the deal is that I certainly played with it as a kid. It was more handily available then because we had our mercury thermometers, which are less available now. And our blood pressure cuffs all had mercury in it. And there are so many places you got a hold of it. And so many of us have played with quicksilver, elemental mercury. But there are other forms. There's inorganic and organic mercury that also can pop up and show around. Now, elemental mercury, even though it's not as around as it used to be, it certainly is still out there in a number of places, and we see the classic list before us, albeit some of the use has certainly gone down over time. It's interesting. It is the only metal that's really a liquid at room temperature. That's kind of a cool, fun quiz, a weird moment. Importantly, it vaporizes, and inhalation can be a problem. So you put those 2 bullets together, and now we have a situation that can occur. Ingestion, interestingly, while this is not doctor recommended, is really not too big a problem. You get it down in your tummy, it's generally going to pass through. Your GI absorption is minimal. But you inhale that which has gone into the air, that becomes a problem. And in terms of, I actually got flipped. I flipped the inhalation and ingestion earlier, and I should have changed those other subsections. But if you acutely inhale a large amount, slight typo here, then really you have a chance for an acute lung disease. On the other hand, if you have a longer or more chronic exposure inhalation, this is a real setup for absorption because the absorption is over 90%, and you can get all sorts of classic diseases that can occur as a part of this. So let's talk about this, and remember, and of course, it keeps popping up. So let's share in this. So what I'm going to do right now is actually I'm going to escape. I'm going to bring up a video here. And this is a mercury vapor experiment done at Bowling Green State University. And I'm going to start rolling this right now. So you guys are going to be able to watch this play. And we're not going to watch this full 5-minute video. I'm going to give you different portions and chunks. But this is very important. You have to understand to what degree this stuff vaporizes. And as you see the scrolling screen, makes me feel I'm watching like Star Wars 1, watching this. I'm waiting for Darth Vader to show up. But basically, when you do this stuff just right, and with ultraviolet light, you can see the mercury as a shadow coming up off. So here's a small mercury spill simulation. It's really not a spill. They actually have it in a Petri dish here. And they're getting it set up. And boy, look at it. They're all gloved up, not like I was as a kid. So that means they'll probably grow up and do better than me. But they hit the lighting just right. You take a look at that video, and you can see the vapor coming up. And there it is, just sitting there. You're not doing anything to it. You're not kicking it. You're not blowing on it. There's no wind on this. It is happening. So understand, as mercury lays there, it continuously will vaporize. So you think about what this potential impact can be. All right, so I'm giving you a good full flavor of that. But now I'm gonna advance this a little bit here. All righty, I think I'm right towards where I want to be as we move on to the next phase here. All right, so that was your standard. Now let's say, the infamous drop the mercury on the carpet moment. Oh, here we go. And let's see how this plays out. Here it is, carpet, pretty little beads of silver mercury there. Just leave it in there. No one messed with this stuff. You just drop the beads down there, and you already know it's probably going to vaporize. And look at that. The beads are vaporizing. And in fact, the degree of vaporization is greater, because this takes you back to physics a little bit. Remember that big glob of mercury in a Petri dish where you had very little surface area visible. But here you've now lots of teeny beads, a lot more surface areas available, and you actually increase the degree of vapor that is coming off. All right. So now what we just did here is, look, there's no beads. And why is there no beads? Because we squished it in the carpet to get rid of it. Let's see what happens. Despite our attempt to get rid of the mercury we see on the top of the carpet, and we squished it in there, we stepped on it, we tried to get rid of it, obviously that has failed miserably, and the vapor continues to flow out of the carpet. And in fact, there's a potential could it be even worse, because once again, when you step on it, you could break those beads into even smaller beads, and thus further enhancing the surface area availability. All right, let's get down serious. Now we got the spilled mercury in the carpet. We're going to take care of that stuff, no problem. Let's break out the vacuum, and let's not just get a vacuum. Let's get a kick-butt vacuum. Look at that one they got there. I bet you don't have one like that in your house. And man, here he is. This guy's going out. Of course, he's a little concerned. Look at what he's wearing. Not exactly what I wear. So there it is. There, you don't see it. Oh my gosh! Look what the vacuuming did. You thought it was vaporizing before. Now you really pissed it off, so to speak. Because look at that. Moral of the story is vacuum cleaners and mercury are a bad combination, and I think you just got a good flavor of that. All right, I think that hits what we want to do, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that and go back to our main presentation. And what, of course, will be nowhere near as much fun as what we just watched. But I think our point is well made. This stuff is just made to vaporize. All right, so let's talk about clinically what kind of things can happen with mercury exposure. And there's a little bit of variability depending upon whether it's elemental mercury, i.e. quicksilver, versus inorganic versus organic. And now, mind you, everything seems to convert eventually to inorganic, so you can't escape some of that aspects. But the quick brass classic thing we think about is the triad of tremor, erethism, and gingivitis. And always fun to see in the end, what will our kids have of this? Of course, you might notice certain items are highlighted in yellow, and there's an increased chance some of our kids may have some of those items. Now, erethism is the emotional ability. And in fact, next to that, you notice I got the word mercurial. I mean, how many of you at a good party get to use the word mercurial? You look across the room and you see that one person and go, oh, he's so mercurial, meaning the temperament varies dramatically from up to down and in and out. And that's really what erethism is. It's just you can be withdrawal, you can be depressed, you're shy, but on the other hand, you can become very agitated, and you have an increased tendency to go back and forth between these things. That is erethism. That is being mercurial. Now, acridemia and Pink's disease, we often will hear both those terms, but really I always got them confused. The brass tacks is we just call Pink's disease more often. It's when the kids had the same thing. In fact, some people refer to Pink's disease as just infantile acridemia. And in the end, this is an idiosyncratic hypersensitivity reaction. Adults, kids, but we classically often think about more in kids, especially when the classic inorganic mercury, mercurous chloride within calomel, and the calomel emulsion being used to help teething and all sorts of other things. I'm sure it was used to treat syphilis like everything else at some point in time or another. But anyways, you get the rashes, they can develop various types, and they can get pain in an extremity. Desquamation can occur. Fever can occur, and all sorts of other interesting things. Renal injury is another classic thing, but mainly we think about that with inorganic. But once again, quicksilver can make that conversion to inorganic over time. There's some very serious CNS events beyond erythism that can occur. And this is classic more, we think, with organic mercury. And this is Dr. Wettenham at Dartmouth who got exposed to dimethylmercury. And in a matter of months, she died of this with a real significant CNS death. But not probably as much with elemental mercury. And then hypertension is another interesting item because what happens is it turns out mercury blocks the catechol-O-methyltransferase, one of the classic enzymes that helps metabolize, degrade your catecholamines. And well, if you're not getting rid of the catecholamines as quickly, you get a little stimulation left, which can include some hypertension. All right, so now we've had our background. Let's get down to business and talk about the cases. In this situation, it begins on a Wednesday. And there was a child seen at the Children's Medical Center here on our UT Southwestern campus here in Dallas. Had a fever and rash. And just like the vast majority of fevers, rashes, and kids who look good, they go home with the classic diagnosis of a viral syndrome. And that's how it played out here. No surprise, pretty standard. Everything suggested the kid looked great that day. And, oh my gosh, this is what happens. One moment, please. Let me get my lights on. Okay. I'd have the music going interlude, but I don't have any music available. All right, so here we go. So the lights in the office go out. That's another story for a long day. I think I need to move. All right, so kid went home, viral syndrome, and away we have it. But now comes Thursday. Here we are, next day. In fact, next evening, going into Friday morning, mom brings that same child back to Children's Medical Center Emergency Department, along with another child who's similarly ill, and the first child is no better. And if mom pulls out her purse and says, oh, by the way, is this possibly something to be a factor? And this was a bottle that was half, 2/3 of the full of this mercury at 99.999% made by a company called DFG. And that certainly caught everybody's attention. This is, once again, we're around probably early Friday a.m. hours, dark early. And nothing like that to wake up the emergency department staff, I say. And interestingly, it was actually one of the kids is the one who thought about this. He started wondering, God, all of a sudden I got two of my siblings or me were sick with this, and I found this mercury, and I looked it up on the internet, and he said, Mom, this may be the case, and away we go. So I hope that was the 14-year-old, and I'm hoping that he heads into medicine because he's clearly got great ability to connect the dots, and so that was wonderful. All right. So these two kids are admitted to the hospital, and toxicology is called, and lots of interviews are being done, mom and the kids and so on, and learning more details about what happened. It turns out, this was a 10 to 11-day exposure that they'd had this bottle at the house since it was obtained. And in addition, turns out there's a third sibling, and of course, obviously, we're starting to wonder how that kid's doing here. And of course, this is now Friday. You can't have these kind of events happen on a Monday. Oh, no. This has to be a Friday, and you're now heading into Friday afternoon. And, any plans you had for Friday evening may be taking a hit right about now. All right. So the bottle was originally found by the 14-year-old sibling. It was actually right near these railroad tracks, which were between his home and the school. And he found it one day while coming home from school and brought it home and then decided to check it out and play with. And this is outside the home garage where they lived. And they had a 9-year-old and 11-year-old sibling who also were able to participate in the joy of playing with quicksilver. So it's down to what are the issues? And obviously, we have a clinical issue going on, suggesting that we may well have toxicity related to mercury in process, but it's always interesting to consider, are there any other issues that we need to be thinking about? So pause. Everybody think about that. Once again, you don't have to write it. You can talk to the person sitting to your left or right. If anyone's in a social distance from you at 6 feet with mask, are there any other issues or things that we got to be thinking about? All right. Let's see here. And there we are. Come on, everybody, all the Ghostbuster fans out there. It gets down to you got to sit back and remember who are you going to call, and who must be involved, who may want to be involved. Remember, who must versus may want. Those are different things, but you know what? If somebody thinks they want to be involved, you probably should go ahead and involve them and really make them a must, because if they don't get to be involved, they'll hear about it later on, then they're going to talk about you. But also, there's some folks out there who can contribute that you may not have thought about right from the very beginning, who have important aspects to share. And so you really have to start back thinking broad. And we got to sit back and think, what really has already happened? What's happened in these last 10 or 11 days? And is there anything else we need to know from the kids? So rapidly on this Friday, lots of these things were starting to be addressed. So early on, who we got to come play? Well, with Dallas County Health Department, we brought them in. Children's Medical Center, the entire hospital, really wanted to be involved because suddenly they're hearing about there's mercury out there around here. The EPA, I mean, when it comes to environmental issues, this is their job. That's the first letter of EPA, EPA. Now, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, just we call ATSDR for short for obvious reasons, another very important agency that has been very helpful. They work with the EPA, they work with the CDC, and they provide assistance on assessment of toxicologic situations, and it can help people get connected and come together. And we've got a long relationship with them within our EPA region. Well, next thing you know, everybody and their brother is now here. This is now Friday afternoon, and I really feel bad because Wendy Chung there in the middle in black, I mean, her eyes are closed. I mean, bad picture moment. But Wendy is one of the lead epidemiologists with the Dallas County Health Department, and we've worked with her many times on a variety of issues. And she and her team came rolling in quickly. To Wendy's right, on the left side of your picture, you see the side of Greg Moore. He is with the EPA, and he was the lead EPA agent there. And then you have this other gathering of all sorts of folks, including Children's Medical Center, who are once again terrorized that there is a mercury roaming around in their hospital somewhere. So really, are there any other issues? I mean, we got a lot of players involved now, a lot of people talking as we begin trying to think of the broad aspects of it. But this is kind of an interesting thing. Where has the mercury been over these 10 or 11 days? And we know a few places, the purse, the car, the emergency room. Has it been at the children's room at the hospital? And we talk with the kids more about where they may have taken the mercury. And by the way, we're at that mercury bottle now. I mean, this is unbelievable. This is the same thing. I remember when that mercury bottle now location discussion came up. Also, I can't remember who brought it up, but they were like hero status at that moment, because all of a sudden we realized, where is that darn thing? Uh-oh. And a all-point search began. In fact, a mass assault at the hospital trying to figure out where is the mercury bottle. And started talking to lots of folks and started looking and searching, and there it was found in a trash can in the emergency department. Actually, it's now bagged with that container is now considered to be a hazard, and a sign said non-hazardous waste incinerate only. Now, please understand, you saw mercury vaporizing at room temperature. The warmer you make it, the more it vaporizes. Now, you can eliminate mercury with incineration at very high heats, and actually trash places that do incineration have aspects built in order to help get rid of the mercury, and that gets measured as to what gets released. That does not get burned. However, that system potentially could easily be overwhelmed when you have a big bottle of the mercury trying to incinerate. The system will likely fail. So this would have been a real problem if this actually had gotten to the incineration place and a bottle of mercury going up in smoke, so to speak. All right, so we solved that mystery. So this gentleman here is with the EPA, and he's got a wonderful toy there, and we're not going to get into the details of what this toy does, but let me just say it does a great job of detecting mercury and mercury vapor. And so you start searching and evaluating Children's Medical Center. The Children's Medical Center's leadership was obviously very concerned of, now we know we had mercury for sure in our ER, in our hospital, what all is contaminated? Because if you have contaminated areas, you have to shut down areas. So this is the implications were just exploding rapidly. And so this is where this gentleman and other colleagues were exploring the hospital now with their detectors. Now, on the left picture, you see he's got his detector in a purse. That is Mom's purse. That's the purse the mercury bottle was pulled from. That's leather. That purse is toast. And because it was very hot, a lot of mercury in there, and it will never come out of leather. It's over. So that purse was gone. In the middle picture, this is typical scanning around the rooms. This is done in the emergency department. This is done in elevators. This is the rooms where the kids are at and other locations, and luckily not finding traces. The right picture gives you an idea of the level of detail that has to be done. So within that purse, each individual item is removed, placed into its own plastic bag, and the bag is sealed. You allow this then to sit for a period of time. Because what's going on, if you got mercury, what you see in that one bag on the right, that's a credit card. And if there is mercury on that credit card surface, what's going to happen, it's going to vaporize and begin to permeate the inside of that bag. So after a period of time of sitting, each item in that purse in its own bag, you did a test of that. And you found certain items that were grossly contaminated, some of which could be cleaned, some of which could not. I like to report that the credit card was only lightly hot, and it was actually very, very cleanable. So anyways, but a lot of things end up having to be trashed. But this is the level of process. So sit back and begin to think about the personnel time already involved in this incident. All right, other questions for the kids. So really, anywhere besides the home, did you show this cool stuff to your buddies or anything like that? Well, and of course, you know how this is going to play. Yep, took it to school. Well, actually, we took it to schools. It was more than one school. And because one of the kids was in elementary, two of the kids were in elementary school and one is in the middle school. The mercury got to go to both places. Yep, it's Friday. All right, so, and it turns out at the elementary school that evening, they had a big event planned. So now we are concerned about mercury contamination at that school where they're about to have an event. It just keeps growing. All right. So where do we go from here? Well, EPA has obviously been very active with us and helping with their detection equipment. But you know what? There's only so many of them, and there's only so much equipment. And, of course, the schools are clearly now involved. And is there any place else where contamination may be present and anybody else at risk? Absolutely. That's an important question. Well, we got other folks at home, and the attached home are at risk, and the other families are there. So understand, the home the kids and their mom lived in was actually a garage attached to a house, a garage that was modified for them to live in. So we had this living garage plus the regular house. EPA is overwhelmed. They called the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, for support. TCEQ, each state will have its own state-based EPA-like operation that can come along and assist the EPA, or sometimes they just take the lead and do things themselves. Now, obviously, we contacted the Dallas Independent School District, where, once again, I'm sure when they got that phone call, they were sitting back going like, yep, it's Friday, and this is how it rolled. All right. So now this is Friday night. And actually, Johnny Ordonez, the fellow, and I at the time, we ended up joining the EPA and going out for the evaluation of the home, just because I'd never been there for an event like this. And so the TCEQ and EPA broke up to evaluate the elementary school, the middle school, the family's garage home, and the actual house to where the garage belongs. And the picture on the right is the outside of the garage entryway. By the way, there's a date on this picture and the calendar, and that date is completely incorrect. This was not happening on New Year's Eve of 2003. All right. But as you can see, the guys are dressed up because they don't know what they're walking into. They don't know how bad the vapor level may be. And so this requires a high level of protection so they do not get injured. All right, so what's the final score? What was found where? The elementary school definitely had contamination. The middle school came out clean. The family's garage was very ugly, unfortunately, in terms of mercury. And the actual house to which they belonged had minimal, and that was able to work out. These evaluations were all completed. It was almost midnight when this was done. I'd like to report the school activities at elementary school did proceed that evening. In the end, they were not stopped. That was a huge discussion in terms of that. The DISD, Dallas Independent School District, obviously very involved. But based upon the best information we had, everything seemed to suggest that the mercury exposure at school probably was nowhere near the portion of the school where the activities were going to occur. And in order to try to cancel it already in a late afternoon situation, it was decided it was going to be a failure to do so. Unfortunately, as the evaluation was done of the scene that evening, it was confirmed where the event took place. There was no mercury at all in that area. So that did work out well. All right. Here are some of the areas that did get messed up. The bottom left, that's the classroom where one of the kids was. It's the hallway outside that classroom. And right down the hallway was a stairwell. Turns out the stairwell is a great place to hang out with your buddies and play with mercury. So anyway, but this just continues to raise the issues of how do you play this? Because, by the way, who else is involved now? We have a school. Who roams around the school? Who's cleaning up around the school? And if you're thinking about custodial staff, you bet. And what stuff does the custodial staff use? Mops, brooms, where are those stored? So all these mops had to be evaluated, brooms evaluated, just to share with you once again how this grows. So this is now, we're heading into the weekend, and weekend teleconferences with a lot of folks. And representatives of all the above listed organizations participated in this. So these were some very broad, big conference calls. Man, can you imagine? This was actually a few years ago before we got so savvy with our gathering here. This was just a strictly telephone conference call, but you know what? It worked out okay. So health risks in the schools, what information to the families, what's going to happen come Monday? How do we handle all this? What's the right thing to do? And really, risk communication was extremely important. And risk communication is its own skill set. And I fortunately had some training and have been through some of this before, but I can say is that this specific event really helped me learn a lot more as we put things forward in terms of the messaging. And you sit back and say, well, messaging, that sounds like I'm trying to play with words and do things that are inappropriate and lie and not quite tell all the truth. And that's not the case. Risk communication is absolutely providing effective, correct information in a way that helps everybody to do the best they can to maintain proper health, and also to help make sure that the public doesn't go crazy with fear because of what's going on. I mean, concern is appropriate, but having folks break out in terror and fear over this could be the wrong response. And you don't want to instill that unless you really want to cause people to be fearful and run for their lives. And that's obviously, that was not the right thing to do. So a lot of the discussions over the weekend, clearly you had to close certain portions of the school to get cleaned. One of the first rules of risk communication is get out in front. Put the word out before anybody else does. Because already now, a lot of people were aware that there was mercury at the school. It wasn't going to be long before somebody got the word out. Next thing you know, through all the different social media sources, everybody would be aware there's mercury at the school, and nobody had heard a word from anybody in authority. And so you can't have that happen. And so we used different mechanisms to get the word out. Created an information letter that went to the parents, prepared for distribution that was going to be passed out in a hard copy form on Monday. I can say is that you can imagine that many groups involved, creating a draft and multiple drafts of the document. It took a while to get that baby honed down, but it worked out. People need a place to call when they hear and get worried. And boy, there's nothing like your Poison Center network to assist on that. 24/7 availability. And so this is a perfect public health event to bring the Poison Center into action. And so we work with our North Texas Poison Center here. We created our script. We created our education of the spies working and answering the phone, created the capability to track phone calls that pertain to this topic, once again, as a way to learn all the stuff. And once again, all this was kicking in over the course of a weekend. And so the Poison Center very much was a very important part of this and a great access of information source for people calling in. Detailed conversations with other kids on Monday. You know, we got stories from the 3 kids who are sick, but we need to learn from other kids to see if there's more to the story that we did not know about. And also I had to figure out things, you know, what we got contamination. Looks like the contamination was pretty much on the floor. All right, so what touches the floor? Shoes. So to what degree were shoes contaminated by kids roaming around? So there became a plan that on Monday, we're going to check a lot of kids' shoes out. And then basically, let's get an opportunity for folks to have a live discussion. And we were able to set up a meeting at the school in the Mercury free auditorium for that Tuesday. And then a lot of the key was, once again, boots on the ground early on. So Monday at school, that's Wendy Chung you saw earlier. That's some of the folks who work with her from the Dallas County Health Department. And there were multiple students who were interviewed to get an idea, really, what is going on, what is not going on. This is some of the crew of the EPA. They're now in the kids' classroom where the primary mercury exposure was found, and they're getting the shoes from all these kids. And what you see on the picture on the right, these are trash bags with the shoes in them. And once again, it's exactly what was done earlier. You take the shoes, you put them in a closed bag. If there's contamination on the shoes, it's going to vaporize off the shoes and fill the bag. And then you do testing of the contents of the air that exists in that bag after a period of time. Nothing like having a warm sun to help really bump it up a little bit too. And fortunately, the shoes came out well. This is a Tuesday evening. Now we actually had a pretty good crowd. We ended up having over 120 people who attended this. Once again, vast collection of parental units there, worried and concerned. We had a good representation there. We got that's my area right now. That's Michelle Helveka. She is one of the leaders of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Melody Gardner, who's the managing director of the North Texas Poison Center. There's Brett Roth, our medical director of the North Texas Poison Center. These are very distinguished, important-looking people. I have no idea who they are, but they look good. This is our principal up front, who's doing a lead-in discussion. Up in the panel up here, that's myself in the middle. On the right is one of our leads with the EPA, Paul Wax, who's one of our faculty here, and actually currently executive director of the American College of Medical Toxicology. So we were up there answering questions for folks as we all worked together. And there were 2 different news stations outside. It was decided not to have them come inside, but we talked with them afterwards as we departed. All right. School portions had to be closed while cleaning was done. A lot of contractors involved. Dallas Independent School District had to pay for that cleaning. I don't know what that cost was, but they had a lot of people there doing that cleaning over a few days. I'm sure it was not cheap. And that's nothing compared to the garage home, where much of those items were totally contaminated and lost. Turns out the kids have been doing all sorts of playing with the mercury in the home, including, I have no idea what possessed them, but by God, they took a pot, they poured some of the mercury in the pot and put it on the stove in there just to see what would happen. And obviously that contributed a little bit more to the vaporization as that heat was applied. I never did get the final answer as to who paid for that cleanup, but that cleanup was not going to be cheap. All right. So anyways, so what we've been through here is just simply aspects of risk communication and the management of a major mercury type event. We've talked a little bit about just in terms of how big and how broad it gets and how many people can be involved. And so when I went back to the beginning of this, we talked about who you're going to call. Well, it turns out there is an amazing number of people called, all based upon what happened with 1/2, 2/3 full bottle of mercury in a matter of days. Of course, what we haven't even touched on here much is how the kids doing. All right, so let's talk about what's going on there, and that's kind of interesting too as a clinician. Now, what they clearly experience, and this is what most toxicity we have of mercury is due to inhalation. And that's because quicksilver is the most common thing that happens. And upon presentation, if you have a very high vapor concentration, you can inhale enough that in a few hours you will get an onset of an acute lung injury, and that can be very, very serious pneumonitis. Luckily, our situation was nowhere near like that. There were really no big lung injuries. A couple of kids did have a little bit of a cough, so maybe that was a little bit of irritation, but nothing too dramatic. But hypertension, rash, fever, a classic item that can be discussed with Mercury also is pain, not completely clear etiology, extremity pain. And of our three, one of them had this bilateral foot pain that was just kind of weird with no clear cause. Emotional issues that can occur, and there's all sorts of things. Clearly, all three kids had a pretty good combination of stuff, especially the stuff that was listed in the yellow. And this is where it all began, fever and a rash, just like any other viral syndrome. But in the end, it turned out to be just a little bit more. The rash had quite a variation in terms of what we got to see. Some of it was a blanching rash, like what you see in that arm there right now. You squish that down, that actually went away. But it's interesting, as we sat back and looked at the literature of the classic rash of Pink's disease or acrodynia. Turns out we really need to write a paper on this. There is no classic rash. Any concept of classic is crazy. We found these case reports from moons ago, and the descriptions of the rashes are all over the place. And so I think the brass tacks is I don't think there really is a classic mercury rash. I mean, so unlike the rash you see there, here we got this classic petechiae. You put your hand on that and squeeze on that left side around that one child's knee there. That's petechiae. That is certainly not going to blanch or go away. On the right side, you see is the lower leg. You have this really strong confluence of this rash that was partially blanching when you pressed on it, but it was really quite a big confluence, more so than just the petechiae. So these kids alone had this fascinating mixture. Here's another one I'm just showing you. This is a fast action photo shot of having just pressed on this child's chest of that red rash, and then the fingers are just pulled away, and you can see that clearly that red rash blanched. So it's fascinating, the diffuse types of rashes that we saw on these three kids. It was really an interesting mixture that came up. We certainly, as a talk service, sat back and thought about this quite a bit. This was actually in our classroom here at the North Texas Poison Center, and sitting back and taking notes and planning and plotting, and who do we got to check out, and they've got a mother, got a grandmother, and had to do a lot of assessments. And luckily, nobody else from the main house ended up having any mercury on board. It really ended up being isolated to the garage as we did our assessment. By the way, I'd like to report that the janitor back at the school also did well and had no toxicity present. In terms of the severity of the illness and what kind of concentrations were found, well, we have both blood and urine testing that was done quite a bit. And this is just some specific numbers that you see of our 9, 11, and 14-year-old. So at 10 days out, which is, as soon as these kids were admitted, they were all getting tested. Understand, if your reference value is less than 10 micrograms per liter, you notice there's a lot of numbers there well above 10 in the hundreds. So clearly there was a pretty impressive exposure that occurred, and we were fortunate in that we were able to continue to follow them over a number of months, actually out to 6 months. And by the time we got to 6 months in terms of urine testing, now we are now down, except for the 9-year-old, clearly within the classic range of okay. And actually, some people will say urine normal is less than 20 micrograms per liter. I don't know what really normal is, but it's somewhere in that ballpark range. And clearly, the kids have finally gotten there, but it took them a while to get there. I mean, and so on. This figure reflects just once again the 14-year-old is in red, and the green is the 11-year-old, and the purple is the 9-year-old, and you can see they bounce around. But just kind of interesting. Take note. Look towards the top, all right, around 300-400. You notice they got acetodote. We're going hog wild. So there are the aspects of consideration. Some of the toxicity is related to oxidative stress, and there have been a number of reports about using acetodote, i.e. NAC, and acetylcysteine, with its nothing like a little cysteine, a little sulfur to donate electrons to help deal with oxidative moments. So we went ahead and incorporated that for the right or wrong. And certainly it's pretty darn safe, and the cost is not too bad. And these kids clearly were sick, so we went for it and did it. You could argue whether that was the path or not. Succimer, DMSA, was certainly applied and started early on in their hospital stay. And it's kind of interesting. take note, you notice as we're deeper into the succimer that some of the peaks took off. Yeah, especially look at that green peak, where, I mean, one above 400 and the other peaks were up above 250. And this all happened during the course of the succimer administration. So reflecting that succimer was probably doing a pretty good job of grabbing on this mercury and hauling it into the urine, and which increases your urine concentration. That's what chelators are supposed to do. But sometimes people get confused by that because, oh my gosh, you're getting sicker, it's getting worse because I give them the chelator. No, the chelator is just doing its job. It's getting it out of the body. Now, what's the big impact? We don't know, but we do know we were certainly eliminating some degree of mercury. This is actually blood concentration. So once again, the stuff in the blood is going to get there quickly and generally go away relatively quickly. And that's kind of what we saw the pattern over a period of weeks as our blood concentrations, all three of them went down and ended up going down pretty well over the course of therapy. So overall, how did our kids do? Hey, they did great. And they probably may well have done great even if we didn't do succimer and acetadote and things like that. But, hey, we all felt better about it. So, hey, that'll work out well. And so when the kids in their 6-month follow-up, everyone's doing great. And so we were very pleased about that end and outcome. And turns out they were getting their garage home kind of refixed up again and trying to get back to normal life and business. But that was clearly an expensive item to do all that work. And I don't know if you noticed in the one slide, I commented that they had a tile floor. I mean, that tile all had to be removed and the concrete base cleaned because the mercury would get in between each tile and you really couldn't clean it out. So the level of cleaning required is really most impressive. All right, so it's a wrap. Inhalational mercury often presents like a viral syndrome, and that's all we had here. And of course, we probably would still be missing it on Friday if the kid hadn't brought in the bottle of mercury, which helped us look smart. Risk communication is an extremely important skill set across medicine. I mean, you sit back and you think about it. Any healthcare provider does risk communication. I, as an emergency physician, as my primary training, think about it. Every time you communicate with a patient, you're essentially doing risk communication because you're sharing good news and bad news and things we got to do and here like this. You don't want to terrorize them, but you want to make sure you're offering effective information and you want to getting out in front of it. So really, every individual patient encounter is a touch of risk communication. This is a situation where you had to apply it not just to the one patient in front of you, but now you're applying it to a large group of individuals. And that was really important. And the third bullet, basically, you got times to bring a large group of individuals together. And in the end, it was good that we had all these different folks involved. Everybody provided excellent input. Everybody was happy because they were involved and not left out. So remember, who do you think needs to be involved versus must be involved? If you think they might need to be involved, you better get them involved. Because, hey, if they really don't want to be there, they'll say, hey, thanks for the call, but I'm going back to dinner. Okay, that's fine. That's good. But a lot of times they can provide great input and do wonderful things. Mercury cleanup is an expensive item, and this was one of those things where in the end the expenses certainly were at a minimum in the tens of thousands of dollars to deal with this single event. Clinically, I don't really have a big rap. We were happy that the kids did well, and hopefully they live happily ever after as they move forward. And in terms of references, just got a couple there. That includes the paper that we just had come out. And, of course, what tox gathering happens without a little touch of Gold-Frank's toxicologic emergencies. And that completes what I have, and so I'm open for any comments or questions, et cetera.
Great presentation, Dr. Kleinschmidt. Thank you so much. For those who are participants, please feel free, if you've got any questions, please submit them to our Q&A section on the right-hand side, and we'll be more than happy to present those questions to Dr. Kleinschmidt and get them answered for you.
And of course, if there are no questions, I like to think that's because I did such a quality job of providing adequate information. Yeah, there we go, yeah.
Okay, let's see. We've got a couple here, so let me see if I can make this bigger where I can read it here. When appropriate, would you please speak to the different forms of HG and how to assess for exposure to each of them in the lab?
Okay, yeah, great question. It gets down to is, so once again, we got 3 different flavors of mercury. Elemental is the quicksilver with the case we just had. Then we have the inorganic, like mercuric, mercurius, chloride, mercury, sulfide, things like that. And then you have organic forms. And the organic, that's like the classic methyl mercury of Minamata Bay disaster. And your dimethyl mercury of what killed Dr. Whittingham at Dartmouth, and ethyl mercury, which that's what's in thimerosal, and like in merthiolate. All right, so in terms of assessments, remember that all mercury loves to eventually become inorganic. So elemental mercury very much will do that path. Now, gets down to is, remember the purpose, your kidneys help you eliminate items that are hydrophilic, that will dissolve in water. Organic things with lots of carbons and stuff like that, remember, they don't want to go into water. Water and organic, they don't go together. So, nutshell is, if I'm evaluating for organic, initially probably the most handy items is actually blood testing, because you're going to be able to pick it up in the blood. It's going to eventually work its way out of the blood, but that can become some of your best initial source. That organic stuff over time can work its way into inorganic, and so as that happens, inorganic mercury is hydrophilic and will be renally eliminated and found in the watery urine. And so over time, you will begin to watch it coming out in the urine. Inorganic mercury exposure, right from the very early on, it'll rapidly get it into the urine. So, you can check some blood, but it's going to be out of the blood real fast. And really, the urine is the primary way to evaluate that. And the same thing for what you saw with the elemental mercury. We saw nice figures there where we saw clearly early on elevated blood levels that came down. We saw the urine was much more persistent and hanging up, and that's because over time, as the elemental mercury was converted to inorganic, and our body is able to steadily eliminate it over a period of time. So, yeah, it depends upon which kind of one you're after as to whether you're going to look more at the blood versus more at the urine.
Great.
All right, what else you got?
Another question is, where did the family get the mercury from?
Oh, that was the 14-year-old found the bottle laying next to the railroad tracks that existed between his home and school. He was coming home from school one day, and there was the bottle. So he picks it up and takes it with him. Now, how you got that bottle of mercury laying in that location, we had a great conversation over that one, but we never did come up with our own best answer. So anyways, but that's how it happened.
Great. If there's any other questions, please feel free. We still have some time. Dr. Kleinschmidt will be happy to answer those questions. And also, folks, just so you know, those that are registered, I will be sending out a post-test for this session and also a survey. So before the end of the day, Mountain Time, I'll go ahead and make sure that I submit that out to the email that you registered with.
Well, I think we're probably there.
Yeah, I think so. I don't see any other questions coming out, Dr. Kleinschmidt, but folks, if at the end you still have questions and this has ended, please feel free to email me. As a host, I can go ahead and definitely send those questions to Dr. Kleinschmidt and get them answered for you. And I think there goes your light one more time.
They did, yeah, they went out. It's one of those motion-activated light switches, but there's a filing cabinet between me and the sensor. So about every 30, 40 minutes it goes off. It's good. It gets me up and it prevents blood clots. So it's all good. All right.
There's another question. Is there a recommendation for how long to avoid? Let me see. It came up so fast I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing. Let me get that up real quick. Okay, we've got a couple more here. When CFL bulbs break, how long will aerosol exposure continue, i.e., is there a recommendation for how long to avoid the area before starting cleanup?
Yeah, good question. Overall, I would, yeah, there is no, I don't know the specific recommendation on that. Great question. I mean, there's clearly is mercury in the CFLs. That's the bad news. The good news is the amounts are small, and truthfully, they're really unlikely it's going to be any major problem. Once again, knowing that the key is don't make things worse. And that is that if you can avoid vacuum cleaners, for example, that's a great way to go. And daubing, I mean, there are professional items that can be used to actually absorb the mercury better as you eliminate things. But the reality is, just like many of us over the years, those of us who are a little older in years, remember every once in a while that thermometer breaks and there you get that little glob of mercury there, and it's like, what do you do with it? Well, you know, you roll the glob into the tissue, and I'm not saying you should put it in a trash can, but that's probably happened once or twice. Deal is, I would not get too worried about that. Now, on the other hand, if you have a giant 3 boxes of CFLs and they all break together at once in your garage, that changes the issue, and it's probably time to call your local EPA folks to get some recommendations on how to approach and deal with that. But I wouldn't worry about a single CFL. One person's opinion.
All right, and then I believe I have another that said, what is the half-life of HG?
That's a fun question, which immediately right off the top of my head, it's not there. I mean, our elemental mercury, you know, when you have a little dab there, it's going to sit there for a long, long time, many years, probably beyond your life. And it will continuously be giving off the vapor. So you're going to have a chance for continued exposure if things don't get cleaned up. Now, once it's inside your body, 1 second here. Light was driving me crazy. You know, 1 second. I love that question, by the way. Just trying to see if I had an answer here real fast on one of my little quick sources to see if I've got that answered. Well, what I've got, in terms of the quicksilver, in the blood, the half-life is about 3 days. In the body, it's about 2 months. So thanks for asking that question. That's always good for me to review this kind of things. All right.
Great. And then I do have somebody else that just commented and said, awesome presentation, Dr. Kleinschmidt. Side note, Dr. Wax told us fellows a story before. He said it cost well over $100,000 for the cleanup.
Yeah, we were hitting some numbers. That sounds about right. Yeah, it's amazing. You sit back and you think it all began with one little bottle, but it's amazing how the tentacles grow and the impact is vast. So good up there. I appreciate that feedback on the dollar figure. All right, I think we're there then.
I think we're there, Dr. Kleinschmidt. Thank you so much for your presentation today. It was great. I thoroughly enjoyed that. We definitely appreciate your taking the time out to give us this presentation today.
My delight. Sounds good. Thanks much, and I wish everybody a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Everybody, please have a great day.